Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Thursday, the 4th of August, 2016. Let's take a look at what's happening with Earl now, well inland here over parts of the southern Yucatan after making landfall last night in Belize. You remember some of the modeling that I showed the other day indicated maybe a southerly track here, keeping it over the land area, not coming back out over the Bay of Campeche, and certainly not coming out over the Gulf of Mexico proper, threatening Texas or northern Mexico. Just not going to happen. Very strong and persistent high pressure over the Atlantic, coupled with the high pressure systems anchored over the southern U.S., just not allowing this much northward progression. Some of this energy, though, coupled with a disturbance developing here in what we call the Gulf of Tehuantepec, probably going to get together to create a new system which will head eventually, as this energy comes off, not directly associated with the leftovers of Earl, but this system down here, all of this kind of combining to perhaps threaten the Baja in a few days. And you can see that on the graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center for the Eastern Pacific. Something to keep an eye on if you're here along the Pacific coast of Mexico. It's the first time all season that we've really had a significant potential threat, and the main issue right now is going to be very heavy rain, and we'll see how this evolves over the next several days. As you know, the Eastern Pacific all the way up to the I storm with Yvette, and it's way out here in the open Pacific, not bothering anyone. But everything else up to that point has not been an issue for Mexico, and I think this could change that, so we're going to want to watch that closely over the next few days. So moving along into the sort of late week analysis here of the sea surface temperatures, and this is going to segue into the discussion of the latest hurricane season forecast update from Dr. Phil Klotzbach and his team at Colorado State University. So before I get into that, here we are, August 4th, 2016. Notice the main development region here, very warm. Western Atlantic, very warm. I've been saying this for a while now, and we can see that the tropical Pacific, especially out here towards the central Pacific, cooled off pretty significantly. Definitely struggling, this La Nina state, to set in. The overall warmth of the Pacific and other factors coming into play that are kind of hard to explain on an outlook such as this, where I don't have all day, and we don't want it to get too boring either. But basically, this La Nina is not coming on as strong as some of the models were indicating a couple of months ago, but the Pacific has definitely cooled. I mean, that's very obvious from where it was this time last year, and once we get to the peak of the season in September, that will also be the case. And make no mistake, some of these negative anomalies in here are significantly colder than they should be. You know, this deep blue in here, some of these are a degree or more Celsius below the long-term average. And if we look at the subsurface plot, again, the top of the map here would be the surface of the Pacific, and then down here is like 250 meters or so. And so this is like a cross-section, and you can see all this blue in here, but there's really not that much deep blue. Several weeks ago, and even a couple months ago especially, we were looking at a lot more of these negative anomalies on the left side of the scale, and that has eroded just a little bit. It's just the overall warmth of the Pacific is kind of like if you had an Olympic-sized swimming pool that was 85 degrees uniform across the pool, Fahrenheit, and you took, 100 gallons of 40-degree water and poured it in there. You could see that on an infrared scanner, but it's going to really dissipate that cold water very quickly. And that's the best analogy I can come up with for you today. The overall state of the Pacific is just warmer than it usually is. We call that a positive PDO, or Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And so this La Nina that would normally come in like gangbusters is being challenged by that warm overall Pacific base state. And so we may not reach but only weak La Nina conditions. But let me just show this again. Make no mistake, this is colder than it should be, and that has definitely helped to reduce the wind shear across the tropical Atlantic and the Caribbean, which we'll talk about more in a moment. Now let's look at this. the beginning of the hurricane season back on June the 2nd, we had a very large area of cold water up here in the northern Atlantic, and the main development region was getting there, but it wasn't as warm as it is now. And of course, we had this colder anomaly in the Pacific showing up. But I really want to focus on this area right here in the North Atlantic, because it was mentioned pretty prominently again in the update today from Dr. Phil Klotzbach. Now let's go to the map today. And of course, I showed this the other day, but I want to re-emphasize this. What a dramatic change. I mean, the only negative anomalies is a fairly small area here, not even the size of Alaska, sitting out in the eastern third of the subtropical Atlantic. In 2013, I should have pulled that map up, this was much larger. It kind of looked like that, and it was more prominent. And all of the colder water up here in the North Atlantic, south of Greenland and Iceland, I mean, you can clearly see this is what it was at the beginning of the season. So basically 2 months ago and now. So it's, come a long way, and this doesn't seem to be nearly as a negative influence as certainly this would have been on the strength of the what we call the Atlantic AMO, or multi-decadal oscillation for the Atlantic. It's warmed overall. So keep that in mind as I go through and talk about the forecast here from Dr. Klotzbach. Actual sea surface temperatures, I always want to look at this every once in a while. This yellowish color all through here, 31 degrees Celsius, 87 degrees or so Fahrenheit, 88, something like that. The rest of the green down here is all 30 Celsius plus in some areas, so no doubt the Gulf of Mexico is ready for very intense hurricane activity if something were to come along. So far we haven't had that yet. And the Gulf, still hurricane free. Earl didn't make it into the Gulf, so it's been the longest that we've seen it without hurricanes, and I think more than 100 years. So good for coastal residents, puzzling for people who like to track hurricanes, because there haven't been any. Off the East Coast, still very warm water temperatures, 29 degrees Celsius. We've lost a lot of that 30 degrees Celsius water profile that was in here. It's interesting. In fact, I don't see any. This is the Gulf Stream. This is all 29 Celsius. So maybe it peaked due to all that hot weather earlier. I don't know. But it's definitely warm, but not quite as warm, maybe by a degree Celsius. So, maybe not as alarming as it once was. But we'll see. There's plenty of very warm water to take advantage of. In fact, the 26 degree isotherm, I like to look for this. There it is right there. And 26 Celsius is roughly 79 or 80 Fahrenheit, rounded up. And it's, a couple hundred miles south of New England. For those who have interest up there, that if a hurricane were to come through like that, just as an example, plenty of warm water in the way. So the stage is certainly set, sea surface temperature-wise. And that is part of the basis for the update here from Dr. Klotzbach at Colorado State University. Now, I realize that there are plenty of people who scoff at the idea of trying to make a seasonal forecast. What's the point? You don't know where they're going to hit, even if they do form. Well, we totally get that, those of us in the business, and certainly Dr. Klotzbach does as well. But you have to start somewhere. It may take 15 to 30 more years for this to become really, really useful. And you think about being able to model the atmosphere and go back and look at numbers that need to be crunched. We don't have that much data. The best data coming from the late 50s on, and really the supreme icing on the cake data is the satellite era in full. Really the 80s on, once the modern GOES weather satellites were in orbit. So we don't have that much data to go on when you think about it, so you have to start somewhere. And there is usefulness in this at trying to figure out the overall puzzle of predicting hurricanes. And so I'll shut up about that and get on with it. You can clearly see, though, that the total season, if he's right, would be 15 named storms, 6 of those becoming hurricanes, and only 2 of those, to say only, that could be plenty, being major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher. Now, we've already had 5 named storms. We had Hurricane Alex back in January, which I really wish that wasn't counted towards the total because that wasn't in the hurricane season. So we basically have 11 named storms to go. 10 if you take Earl out, I guess, right? Or I don't know. Remainder of the season, so 11. Yeah, it'd be 10, and it became a hurricane, so I guess we'd have 4 to go and still have 2 major hurricanes. Either way you slice it, we have almost a full hurricane season ahead of us, considering that the numbers are usually around 10, 6, and 2 over the 100-year average, roughly. So we have a lot of hurricane season left, despite what we've had, and I think a bulk of that is going to happen in September, and let me explain why. The good news here, despite that forecast, if you don't want hurricanes, the next 2 weeks is definitely made for you. Probably more than 2 weeks. I can't say there won't be any development, but the Saharan air layer and the increase in air pressure out here is back. This is an upper level low that's anchored out here to the west of the Canary Islands and well south of the Azores. But yeah, we're having another large area of high pressure coming out over the tropical Atlantic, and the Saharan dust and the warm air, all of that is back. And so only sort of this area through here is a tropical wave in here. We have a flare up here. These might have to be watched down the road, but even the intertropical convergence zone getting squashed right now. Now, before you say, well, there you go, the season really isn't going to do anything, I have pointed out numerous times that it's not until August 15th and beyond that we really consider the true meat of the hurricane season. In fact, if I had the map, I'd pull it up. On August 15th, 2005, there was also a huge Saharan air outbreak. And 2 weeks later, one of the most devastating hurricanes to hit the United States ever made landfall, and that was Katrina. And I'll probably pull that map up, that satellite shot. I'll find it and show you on this August 15th, just to compare. This time of the year, this does happen. So it'll be a nice lull. This is a water vapor image showing that area, upper level low, and then very dry air coming off Africa. So probably going to be a quiet couple of weeks, but then towards the end of August. Oh, and let me just say one more thing. I got a lot rattle around in my brain today. I remember 2010. It was like August 20th or so, 19th or 20th. I had gone to the Weather Channel in Atlanta. They were doing like a Hurricane Week thing, and there was really nothing out there. Lots of Saharan dust coming off. Brian Norcross and some of the other, Stu Ostro was there. We were looking at some of the maps in the studio. Dr. Nab was still at the Weather Channel then, who's now the director of the National Hurricane Center. And you remember 2010? It seemed like nothing was going to happen all the way towards the last third of August, and that ended up being a huge year hurricane season-wise. So, you know, it just usually takes until the end of August, the last third, for that lid to come off climatologically speaking, and I don't see any reason why that'll change. And in fact, I think September could be quite busy in the Atlantic. So use this time to get ready for that. Let the lessons of Earl help you. If it wasn't for land being in the way, that thing would be almost, I think it would be a Category 3 today. It was well on its way to developing a very well-defined core, and we need to look at that as saying, hey, we need to be ready for the season. All right, well, I'll stop rambling. You can tell I'm fired up because I know as best I can what's coming, and I just want people to be ready for it and not be taken by surprise and to say they weren't warned, because that's frustrating when that happens, right? All right, well, have a good rest of your Thursday. I'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll talk about what's happening with the leftovers of Earl and what may brewing in the Pacific as well. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks, as always, for taking time out of your day to listen to me, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.